There is a garden, there is a city, and there's a kingdom of God. And it is beautiful, and he is bringing it right now into our midst. So we are talking today about Jeremiah, Life as Challenge. We have been continuing on in our series, Life As. And if you guys can remember way back about 6 weeks ago, we started out looking at life as wisdom, and then we explored life as worship. We looked at life as suffering, life as deep longing and desire, and then ultimately life as love. Well, we had a little bit of a break from that last week with Mother's Day. I hope you guys had a wonderful day with your mothers and just being with people that you love. Today and next week, we are finishing up this particular series, and then May is over and the summer's here. Can you believe it? Now, by the way, I think Central still has about 2 weeks of school to remain. I mean, my condolences. Yeah, wow. Parents are happy, maybe students and teachers are not, but anyway. The summer's almost over, but today we're looking at one of the prophets, Jeremiah. Next week we're finishing up the series with another prophet, Isaiah, and life as hope. But today, life as challenge. You have to understand that prophets usually were not invited to birthday parties. Prophets were rarely invited to baby dedications. Prophets were not on the list of speakers that you wanted to come to your commencement graduation speech. You know those times when everybody's saying kind of bland, general things. Oh, you are the most awesome group that ever that graduated. The future's bright. You're going to get amazing jobs. You're going to get wealthy. And you're going to change the world. Well, prophets couldn't say any of that stuff, so they just didn't get invited to give those kinds of speeches. For Jeremiah, his entire book is sort of this message, life as challenge. And in one sense, it's kind of getting in our face. Well, because God got in Jeremiah's face with a really strong word, and through Jeremiah, God got in the face of everybody, his whole people. It's a pretty strong word. It's why prophets are not always the most popular people. And in fact, it's usually why we prefer pastors not to be prophets. We can only put up with so much of it. And yet, apparently for God, it was really significant because there are 16 prophets and their writings in the scripture. 4 are major, 12 are minor. All that means is the length of their book. I'm going to come back to that in just a moment. This is one of the most famous pictures of Jeremiah. It is by Michelangelo on the Sistine Chapel. Always have loved this particular painting. But there's another one that's just about as significant, and that is one done by Rembrandt. And this is a picture that is often called Jeremiah the Weeping Prophet. Now, something about Jeremiah that a lot of people don't know is that he is the only prophet to have his name associated with 2 different books. Not only the longest book in the Bible, Jeremiah, but also a book called Lamentations. And as you can kind of imagine, Lamentations is not a book of celebrations. It is a book of lament. It is a book of sadness. It is a book of sorrow. That's because Jeremiah was in a very difficult time in the history of Israel. He ministered for 4 decades, 40 long years, and he was called by God to serve in very difficult times. Here's what was going on in the nation of Israel during that time. They were just walking far away from God. They were kind of becoming a spiritual wreck of a nation. They weren't following the ways of God. They weren't doing justice. They weren't practicing shalom. They weren't filled with loving kindness toward people. They were just slowly becoming a spiritual wreck. They had corrupt priests. They had evil kings. They had false prophets. Their entire leadership team was leading the nation in really bad ways. And God called Jeremiah to be the voice of the Lord to this time, this particular situation, these leaders, this entire generation. And to make matters worse, there was another king, the king of Babylon. His name is Nebuchadnezzar, that he was marching with vast armies. They were going to crash upon the walls of Jerusalem, wave after wave, and the city was going to be destroyed. And there's going to be a 70-year captivity. It was known as the Babylonian captivity. All of that was a message that Jeremiah had to deliver. It was a difficult message for difficult times. It was very challenging. Now, did any of you guys ever read this book, The Road Less Traveled? It was by M. Scott Peck. It came out in 1978. Eventually became a bestseller, sold 6-7 million copies. And Jeremiah and Peck were on the same page in terms of understanding how difficult life is. These are some of the most famous opening words of a book. Life is difficult. First 3 words, the first sentence, the first chapter, life is difficult. And he goes on and says, this is the great truth, one of the greatest truths that we need to know. Now Peck wasn't a prophet. He was a psychologist with deep spiritual leanings. Eventually, he made a very significant commitment of his life to Christ, but he was interested in the psychology of human health and the spirituality that would make that possible, because as he looked around and as he went through his practice, he just realized how difficult life was for people and how life was not working out for people. And he understood that it's hard raising kids. It's hard loving your spouse. It's really difficult to get older and to deal with sickness and to have surgeries. And eventually the dying process, it's difficult to go through those things. It's difficult to watch people you love going through those things. And Peck was no stranger to difficulty. Eventually, he was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, lived for many years, just with that slow, debilitating condition, robbing movement from him. And he was also diagnosed with pancreatic cancer and died of pancreatic cancer. So he understood, not only from his clients, but from his own particular situation, that life is indeed very, very difficult. There's another very recent book. It's called The 12 Rules for Life. Very, very interesting book. I'm just still in the early chapters. But in chapter 2, and I have this, we read this, every even slightly worn out adults know that life is hard. Every even slightly worn out adults know that life is hard. Is anybody here like slightly worn out? Yeah. Yeah. I wish I was only slightly worn out. But yeah, I mean, you just had to get into the adulthood years for a little bit, and I'm slightly worn out because life is already getting pretty hard. And when you don't have a framework of wisdom, when you don't have a compelling passion and mission for life, when you don't have a community of friends who deeply love you and come around you, and when you don't have a connection to the transcendent God, then this life that is hard and difficult becomes undoing for you, and it just winds up wrecking you. Here's the one verse, really one verse we're going to look at today. I'm going to refer to a few others, but Jeremiah chapter 12, verse 5. If you have raced with men on foot and they have worn you out, how can you compete with horses? What an image. You're running with people and they're wearing you out, but now there are horses that you're going to have to run with. Eugene Peterson wrote a little book called Run with the Horses, where I sort of got this whole inspiration from, and he authored the message. He says it this way: so Jeremiah, if you are worn out in this foot race with men, what makes you think you can race against horses? Now, the context of this in chapter 12 is that Jeremiah's just been complaining to God about how hard it is. He's already been doing ministry. It's been challenging. He's been rejected. He's had some stuff coming against him. And it's only the beginning. And God just sort of creates this little analogy for Jeremiah. Jeremiah, it's like you've just begun. It's like you're just running with people. And before long, you're going to have to run with horses. How are you going to run with horses if you're already being worn out from running with people? Now, I'm going to tell you today what it means to run with horses. I'm also going to tell you that you've got to run with these horses. It's just not an option not to run. So what it means to run and why you must run. What I don't have time to do very much today is tell you how can you do it? How will you be able to run with the horses? That is what the devotional resource for this week is all about. What I did, there's probably a dozen good lessons in Jeremiah about how we run with horses. I chose 5 of the most important ones. They're in the devotionals. You're going to get a lot more insight in terms of actually how you do this. But today is what it means to run with those horses and why you must run with those horses. Let me just talk about running with people for a moment. You notice that God did not say, hey, you're worn out from strolling with people. He said, you're already running with people. In other words, just normal life takes some energy, doesn't it? Everyday life takes some exertion, some effort, some strenuous activity just to do daily life. That's just how it is. And so God uses an analogy. It's like just normal life is like you are in a race running with people. So Becky and I like to go on walks. And we live near the entrance to the rail trail, so we'll go on the rail trail. We'll go for a nice little stroll. It's fun. It's casual. We talk. Every now and then we want to do a little bit of a brisk walk. Occasionally I decide I'm going to go for a run by myself, and so then what I wind up doing is I go, and next thing I know, I'm just putting out a lot more energy, a lot more effort, a lot more activity running by myself than I was on a walk. God's talking about running, but he's not even talking about running by yourself. He's talking about running with others, running against others. And one time I happened to see the York College track team running by. Now, I didn't go running with them because I didn't want to embarrass the young guys. I just didn't want to do that to them. But I tell you what, watching those young people running, it's like, boy, there was even more energy, more exertion, more strenuous activity as they were kind of, knowing that they were competing a little bit with each other. So God's using this image of run because normal life takes some energy. But then there are these horses that we have to run against, and there are different kinds of horses. Let me talk about the first group of horses as these horses of our own personal struggles. Now, here's the difference between running with people and running with horses. When you're not getting along with your spouse, if you're having some arguments, if you're annoying each other, you're running with people. When there's been an affair, when you're separated, and if you get divorced, now you're running with the horses. You don't like your job. Your boss irritates you. Your job's not meaningful, it's not fulfilling. You're running with people. When you don't have a job, and when you can't find one, now you're running with the horses. Your kid talks back to you, gets a little smart alecky with you. You're running with people. You find out your child's doing drugs, you're running with horses. You suffer from York County allergies. Hey, by the way, isn't it great that York made the top 5 in the nation? We finally made a top 5 list. It's bad places for allergies. But, man, you've been suffering with allergies, you're running with people. You have a consult with your doctor, and your doctor says it's cancer and it's stage 4. Now you're running with the horses. You see the difference between running with people, daily stuff, that's hard as it is, and then running with horses, these personal struggles that get even deeper and hard. You see the difference. Jeremiah, you've been running with people. You're even the day normal stuff is tiring you out. There's horses of personal challenges you're going to have to run with. How are you going to do that, Jeremiah? Now, there's a couple things that you can't wind up doing. You can't wind up just giving up because you have to run with horses. You can't wind up getting scared about those horses that are out there. You can't wind up withdrawing. You can't wind up escaping into coping mechanisms that are usually addictive in nature. You can't do any of those things. And here's what else you can't wind up doing. You can't say, well, I'm going to run with these horses on my own strength. I'm going to muster up my own resources. I'm going to run with these horses on my own. You just can't do that. In fact, just a couple of chapters earlier, Jeremiah says, listen, if you got wisdom, don't boast about it. If you got some wealth and resources, don't boast about that. If you think you're strong, that's not where your true strength is, but where your true strength is, where your true wealth is, where your true wisdom is that you know God, and that you know that God is the God of justice, of loving kindness and mercy, and that God is with you. You've got to get this deep connection with God if you're going to run with horses. And one of the devotional lessons I'm going to tell you how Jeremiah did that and how you can have that deep connection with God. Because we are all going to have to run with personal struggles because life is difficult, life is hard, and sometimes becomes horse-level difficult. We have to learn how to run. That's one particular kind of horses, these personal problems. There's a second kind, and I like to call these the horses of cultural challenges, maybe the horses of social problems and issues. And by the way, I think the image I came up with is appropriate. It's like this stampeding herd is what these kinds of issues feel like. Now, I'm in a Monday morning group with some guys, and we got talking about this past week, and we were talking, what are some of these social, cultural problems that are just massive in our midst? And we came up with a pretty decent list of problems, and it's not even a comprehensive list. It was just a pretty decent list of what that stampeding herd is like. And by the way, that was before the Santa Fe episode happened. Again, another just really tragic episode of violence in our school systems. When those kinds of things happen, that's a horse that we're having to figure out how do we run with that kind of horse. By the way, wasn't it really interesting how we had to treat this one? This was a case where this particular episode happened when the royal wedding was taking place. Man, did any of you else notice the juxtaposition? They're from over here, they're having interviews about all that's going on with Harry and Meghan and the wedding and the celebration and the joy. And and then they quick flash over to Santa Fe, Texas, and you get a quick little bad news, and then they quick go back to the wedding. I think if the wedding had not been going on, the news would have been fixated on this latest school shooting. But that's just one of the issues, violence in our nation. I mean, does anybody else notice and think that people are getting a little crazier out there? They're getting a little angrier out there? Did you see the guy who he was missing his plane, and so what he did is he ran out on the tarmac and tried to break his way into the plane. It was the wrong plane, by the way. Horses. There's racism in our culture. We have to deal with that. There's sexism in our culture. We have to deal with that. There's an opioid crisis in our culture. We have to deal with that. There's mass addictions everywhere. I was recently in Europe, and I was in Holland. I was talking with some friends there, and they're just baffled by the opioid crisis. They say, we don't have that in our country. What's going on in your nation that this is such a growing epidemic? They're just some of the horses that we're having to run with. 14% of Americans live in poverty. 1 out of every 6 children in America doesn't have confidence about where their next meal is coming from. This is America, not a third world nation. These are the horses that we are dealing with. And there's terrorism, and there's so many, there's like a stampede of these things. Now, by the way, Jeremiah had his own horses. There were his own cultural situations of just titanic proportion. Things are breaking down and unraveling all across the Israelite culture, and Jeremiah had to know how do you run with these massive social problems. Now, once again, there's some things that just don't work. And by the way, sometimes the church hasn't been real good on this. But see, one of the things that doesn't work is when we just say, you know what, we're going to withdraw and live in denial and pretend those things aren't there. Have you guys ever seen this quote before by Edmund Burke? All that is necessary for the triumph of evil is that good people do nothing. Wow, does that ever speak to me? All that is needed in your home, and all that is needed in your community, and all that is needed in our city, and all that is needed in our state, and all that's needed in our nation is for good people to say, there's nothing we can do, and then do nothing. Now, there's times when the church has rolled up its sleeves and jumped into the middle of that stampeding herd and run with the horses and done amazing, beautiful, wonderful things. And then there's times when we've been so scared of that stampede, we just withdraw and want to stay safe and secure in the walls of our building. We are living in a time when we cannot stay safe and sound. We have to wind up engaging. So here's another lesson that you're going to wind up getting in the devotional this week. What Jeremiah knew is that he couldn't depend on other people to solve these problems. He couldn't depend upon the political leadership. He couldn't depend upon the religious leadership. He couldn't depend upon the cultural leaders of the day, because they were actually all part of the problem. And as I'm reading some of the statistics on how much you and I trust or don't trust those in leadership, if we think, well, we're just going to sit by and let those in leadership solve our problems, we've got another thing coming, don't we? I mean, politicians are going to solve our problems, really? I mean, have they ever really solved their problems in a meaningful, significant, lasting way? Boy, a friend clued me into this one. I did not know this. I've lived in Pennsylvania my entire life. He said, Brian, do you know that the Pennsylvania state government is one of the most corrupt governments in the nation? I said, really? In Pennsylvania? We're the land of Quakers and Mennonites and Amish. How do we get so? He said, and sure enough, I went and looked it up. We're number 6. We didn't quite break into the top 5. But wow. And so that's why, I just love when godly individuals of character and compassion and love and integrity and dignity and respect want to get in there and run with those horses. We just need a whole lot more of them. But you and I, we need a compelling mission from God, a personal mission for the difference that he wants us to make, and we need a powerful word of hope. And Jeremiah winds up getting that in chapter 29, and here's part of what God says to him. Jeremiah, listen, I want you to know the plans I have for you. I've got plans for you, Jeremiah. I've got plans for my people. I plan to give you a future. I plan to give you hope. I plan to bless you. I plan to wind up restoring all that is being taken away. And man, do we ever have to seize hold of that powerful hope. Now, next week, by the way, The message is on the prophet Isaiah, and the message is life as hope. Because of all the prophets, of all 16 of them, Isaiah is the one with the most profound understanding of hope. I'm going to tell you just a little bit more about that at the very, very end. There's one more kind of horse that I think you and I need to learn how to run with. And these are the horses of higher calling. And I don't think you can see it as well up there, but here, looking closer, there's just something energizing and full of life and vitality and beauty. And there's a smile on this guy's face, and he's actually out there running with horses. So much for dancing with wolves. He's running with horses. And hear what this is all about. Is Jeremiah was already, about a business. He already had stuff that he was doing before God came to him. And when God came, he said, Jeremiah, I'm going to take you to a higher level. There's more for you to do than what you are doing right now. Jeremiah, you cannot settle for mediocrity. Jeremiah, you cannot settle for doing the bare minimum to get by and ride this stampede out. Jeremiah, you cannot coast because there is so much more I have for you. Jeremiah, I'm going to take you to a higher place. I'm going to have to train you. I'm going to have to teach you. I'm going to have to push you. I'm going to have to develop you. Jeremiah, that's what I'm going to do for you because you are fearfully and wonderfully made. You are a little lower than the angels. You are my workmanship, and I've got a mission for you. Jeremiah, if you've been used to living in the comfort zone and thinking, I'm just going to spend my days there, not for you, Jeremiah. I'm going to take you to a place where I'm going to stretch you. I'm going to put you in some places where you don't have what it takes. You're going to have to get into those places so that you can learn to depend upon me to be your strength. You're going to have to learn to depend upon me to be your wisdom. You're going to have to learn my words. You're going to have to learn my ways. You're going to have to find courage and faith and trust and hope. And Jeremiah, I'm going to take you to a place where I'm going to stretch you so those things happen. And Jeremiah, every now and then, I'm even going to take you to a couple places where you're going to feel very, very stressed. There's going to be a few places that are going to be really, really hard. And it's at those places where I'm going to do some of my deepest work within you. I love that idea. I am relentlessly developmental about myself and as many people as I meet. I look at you guys. The potential that is loaded within you. The gifts that are, some of them lying dormant within you. The resources of God that you're just starting to kind of see the tip of the iceberg, and we all know it's so much deeper down. There is so much more that God has for you. And it is my desire, and it is in fact the desire of the entire staff here, to do anything that we can to help you move into those places of full development of the God-given potential that is within inside you, so you can run with all the horses that He's going to call you to run with. His life became his answer. When God said, Jeremiah, how will you ever be able to run with the horses? Well, in his own way, Jeremiah decided that he would follow God, no turning back. And the rest of his life became the answer. God, I'll do it by just simply following you. So this week, run with the horses. Just do that by following Jesus. Don't turn back. Just keep on following Jesus. Run with the horses. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord cause His face to shine upon you. May the Lord be with you this week and always. Amen and amen. Guys, have a great week. We'll see you next Sunday.